Hello, well we're back for the second part of my Okinawan Sai overview. Here's the same collection I started the first video with. I'll have a link to the last video in the description to this one. So you can go in order if you just stumbled across this one here. Now let's get to some of the things I didn't have time for in the last video, and one of them is how you carry these things. This is, I think, a pretty decent selling point. This is a deadly weapon because of that point and the length, but, a sword, a knife, anything like that, you need a scabbard. Well, you don't with this, because the shaft is not sharpened, only the point. Well, points, I should say. And yes, I'm aware that people weren't wearing gis and karate belts back in Okinawa, in civilian life. But as long as you had a belt of some kind, then there you go, just slip it right in, and it's ready to go. And you can draw it out very quickly from this position. There you see it on my hip, so it's kind of like a six-shooter in the Wild West, basically. And wearing them gives me an excuse to talk about another dimension that I haven't mentioned yet of this weapon, which is that it wasn't just a pair of sai all the time. See, I've got this one here, dead center in my back, got it a little bit askew, but at the center of my back, one, it's hidden, so that's nice, but that could be one of three. Now, part of it's just simple math, 3 sai are better than 2, but it's also because this is, as we talked about before, a throwing weapon. Carrying 3 means you now have the option to throw 1, kind of your opening move. It's a potentially deadly move. You could take out your opponent before they can even get close enough to engage on a melee basis. And if that doesn't work, or if you have more than one person to fight, you're still equipped with a full pair, right? Full complement, one in each hand. So here you go. These are also from my teacher's collection, Concho Chapman, and what's great about these is they give us an excuse to talk about even more nuance around this weapon, not just the fact that you'd have 3, but let's deal with that first. Again, you're able to throw it, fantastic, you've got an instant backup, works really well, makes a lot of sense. The real surprise behind the 3 is, in theory, as these were used by law enforcement on Okinawa, you could kind of join all 3 of these and form an ad hoc handcuff in a way. A restraining device, I should say. And the idea was that each of the 3 points would poke you if you tried to move around too much. So you'd have one kind of going up the back and one on each leg, pointing down and, diagonally. And that gives us a good chance to talk about these as law enforcement implements. They weren't just that, but they are strongly associated with that role in Okinawa and the Okinawan Islands. And it's really interesting. You can see why. I mean, it's part billy club. Right? I don't have to stab somebody. You can beat them and subdue them with the shaft. You can strike, as we talked about in the previous video, with the butt end as well. And you can use the yoku, or the prongs there, to catch an incoming weapon. So you're trying to bring in a suspect, but he's wielding a sword or whatever at you. Then it gives you the defensive capabilities to neutralize it. Also to disarm, right? You catch, say, a bow, a staff, with both of your sai. Now you've got them kind of trapped. Both hands, good leverage, and you can actually disarm them and throw them to the ground that way. So it's like the billy club in England, or the sap, the leather sap in the United States. It's a non-lethal weapon, but a very effective one that can be used by, essentially, a police officer. Big change here is this one can absolutely be deadly at the same time, and quite easily just go for the thrust and, take it to the hilt. This set gives us an excuse to talk about more than just the fact that you could have 3. Notice that the yoku, they flare out, and that's more typically what you see nowadays, but the pair that I focused on last time in the last video, they didn't do that, so kind of changes things a little bit. Obviously this gives you a better chance of catching your opponent's weapon. A little bit more room for leeway, but not quite as effective when you're thrusting with one of those tips. And that's one of the techniques that comes into play when you're using these. You let the central shaft guide you into the target, so then one of the yoku tips actually does the damage. But here's the real surprise when it comes to this one. Notice that the shaft, it actually bulges out. That is not normal at all. Usually they taper down the further you get away from basically the moto, the cross section. So this one does not do that. It's very purposeful. This is raising the center of gravity. So this is a much better balanced sai than you would usually hold. And with that swelling there, right in the sweet spot for a swing, this is clearly one that's optimized for the swinging, clubbing strike. And one of the cool things about this is it doesn't stop it from being a thrusting weapon, because then it tapers back down and makes basically a kind of normal, typical sai point. Although you will notice it's kind of a more uniform point. It doesn't just cut off abruptly with that kind of 45-degree grind that you see on so many of the other ones. This one actually tapers down naturally to a point. If anything, then, I think this one might actually be more efficient on the thrust than most of the other ones that you're seeing in this video and the last one. I picked two of these up and did the kata that we were working that day, and the change in balance is amazing. I mean, I took a picture here to highlight that shape for you, but I guarantee you didn't notice that back during the panoply type shot, or if I just showed these to you from a typical perspective, you wouldn't even notice. But it makes a world of difference when swinging it around as an impact weapon. Speaking of blunt force trauma, this set really wanted to optimize that, as you can see here, with a pointedly pointed sukagashira, or pommel. Certainly ups the destructive capabilities when you're punching in the reverse position, or just striking with kind of a hammer fist blow. And yes, it just looks cool too. Now for a little more hands-on work. Notice this, if I grab it thusly, all the metal lines up behind my swings. That maximizes my momentum, but that's not actually the typical hold. This is, with the thumb right there on the moto, and you can see it's just more maneuverable. And then we talked about this one in the previous video, and look how much leverage that gives me. See that figure right there? Just so fast, because I've got a lever under my finger. But now let's get on to the really fun part, and there's the throw. You bury that in somebody's foot, and you will definitely ruin their day. And yes, one more grip. What if I hold it this way? I can hook with it, I can strike with it, but that's the main thing, is I can throw further with it. Well, I knew I had a lot to say about these, so there's going to be another video on top of this one. Check out this pair that this master has. I've never handled a pair like that. That's super long skewers. That would really change the feel and technique. I've got to get a pair like that at some point to play with. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, here are just some bone breakers, right? These are supposed to be from China, I don't know, but just to show the variety, from true truncheon to kind of a skewer to the more typical sai, which is somewhere in between. Well, I hope you check out my next and last video in this series, because these guys still have a couple more surprises. Thanks.